One of the themes that we talk about a lot doing this podcast is trust production. We want you to trust us. Welcome to Alt Investing Made Easy, where we explore the complex world of alternative assets. I'm Roland, a securities attorney, investment advisor, and your co-host.
And I'm Sarah, an investment advisor and corporate attorney, and your other co-host. We'll guide you through real estate, private equity, and more, making complex topics accessible.
Tune in for insights that empower your financial journey.
Let's make alt investing easy, one episode at a time.
Welcome everyone to Alt Investing Made Easy. Today we are going to do an episode just with Roland and myself, and we'll be discussing a topic that we introduced all the way back in episode 16, which is this concept of the 5 capitals, introduced by our friend David Claflin, and based on work that he's done with his mentor. So Roland, you want to talk a little bit more about the 5 capitals?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. This is a fun topic for us today. It's more touchy-feely, I guess, and but it's really important because it just underlies the philosophy of what we're really trying to achieve here. And the reason why we got into this in the first place is just like Sarah said back in episode 16, we had our friend David Claflin on as a guest, and David is a qualitative estate planner. And what that means is he takes a look at why you engage in the estate planning, not just all the tax savings, the quantitative things that you can do to reduce your tax burden, particularly at death, but in other ways. But asking the question, why are you engaging in the estate planning? People think about their legacy and passing their assets on to their heirs, and inevitably think, well, what's going to happen in the future? And what David turned us on to is this idea of the 5 capitals, and this is developed by the James E. Hughes Foundation. James Hughes was an attorney, or is an attorney, a financial planner. And this was the philosophy of wealth counseling that they developed and they believe is really significant, really important. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right off the bat so we can kind of take a look at these.
So basically, this introduces the idea of the 5 capitals, and that wealth is a comprehensive well-being. It's not just about financial wealth. And of course, here we talk a lot about alternative investing and how you increase your financial capital or your financial wealth. And that's obviously important. But along the way, we've also encountered this in conversations with other people who've been on the show, is that they're often underlying driving principles for a lot of people. And it's nice to see this here because it gives a framework that's very easy to relate to, I think, for anyone, because these are all things that probably we think about to a certain extent. So the specific context that this came up with Mr. Hughes was that he was in the process of working with families. He discovered that there are these other issues that get in the way of the preservation of wealth across generations. And there's the sayings of, the one I know is wealth dies in the 3rd generation, or there's shirt tails to shirt sleeves
Short sleeve. Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Short sleeves in 3 generations, something like this. Or there's one from the Netherlands about clogs to clogs, or the idea being that somebody can generate a lot of capital and then it becomes generational wealth. This is financial capital. And then it survives the generation that was closest to the person who generated it. And then it maybe passes off and gets all spent, or other things happen. And that when you counsel people in regards to estate planning, whether it's as a lawyer or from the point of view of a financial advisor, you realize that there are other issues at play that maybe cause that depletion of capital across generations that could be avoided with other kinds of planning in the process of estate and financial planning. And I think that was what, as I understood from David Claflin, that's the genesis of where these ideas came from.
Yeah, just trying to inform estate planning clients about thinking about other issues and just, who gets what and when, but really trying to address these other ideas. And I really like, you touched on it, and the statement at the top, he spent his career uncovering how families with significant financial capital can leverage all their resources to build a family that flourishes across multiple generations. I really want to underline that point. And this occurs when families focus on growing 5 key capitals. So that's, what we're really talking about here.
Right. And so let's get into it, Roland. I'll read the first one, and then I guess we'll share our own examples of how that we have that in our own lives, and how we value that, perhaps would be the way to put it.
Yeah, maybe giving we talked ahead of time, but we thought it'd be kind of fun for Sarah and me to share some personal things about ourselves, because we think that, one of the themes that we talk about a lot doing this podcast is trust production. We want you to trust us. We want to come across as trustworthy people that you can rely on for good quality information. And the idea was that we were going to share some personal things about our lives. We're not going to go into the nitty gritty, all the details, but
details.
some personal things that, we all have our own story, and Sarah and I both have our own stories. So yeah, Sarah, just thanks for letting me interrupt.
No problem. All right. So first let's go to, let me make this big enough so I can properly read it. The human capital. So the human capital of a family consists of the individuals who make up the family. Their human capital includes their physical and emotional well-being, as well as each member's ability to find meaningful work, establish a positive sense of identity, and pursue his or her own happiness. So, when you think about families, I think we talked about this before with David, Roland. Remember about some of the super dramas that are out there that we're all maybe a little bit obsessed with, and a lot of them deal with the succession. Like Succession is one of them, and arguably the human capital element in that show, if you've watched it, is pretty depleted. Everybody's kind of at their core worst, and that's what makes it entertaining, I guess. But this human capital issue really has to do with families and letting people be individuals, I guess, and how they relate to each other, so that they can stay healthy and whole, even as, generations progress with a lot of wealth or financial capital. So do you want to tell us about who you think is your human capital?
Yeah. I would say that in this area, I'm fantastically wealthy.
Huh.
I got married pretty young and divorced about over 10 years ago. So divorce wasn't, ever really in what I envisioned, but what came from my marriage was 4 beautiful kids that all have their own gifts and talents, and really give me an easy reason to get up in the morning and really try to be my best, and being a good example to them, and be present for them. But I also think about my other immediate family members, my mom and dad. And I've had sometimes a difficult relationship with my dad in the past, but I'm happy to say now that I finally grew up enough to where I was really I've really been able to make great friends of both my mom and dad. And it's fun being with them now, and just experiencing them as a more grown up adult, and appreciating them, in a way that I've never been able to really before.
Well, it's funny when I think about human capital, because I think about it in 2 directions. One is my own personal life, in the sense of my husband and the 2 little beings that we created together. And then the other is that I'm from a large family of 5 kids, and I'm the oldest one. And there's a lot of diversity in my wider family. And so I am very appreciative of having a good start with appreciating and navigating very different personalities, very different perspectives across a wider family, and then in my immediate sibling group, and with my parents, because my parents were they were of the 60s generation, and they I wouldn't say experimented. They chose a path in their lives that involved things that are very commonly popular today, actually, but in those days it was considered, weird spiritual stuff or whatever. Or I used to joke about how I was the kid who had homemade wheat bread with grains in it, Well, when everybody else got white bread, and now of course that's super trendy. I think we all wore Birkenstocks back in the 80s, and of course that's also super trendy again. So, but anyway, I actually have always appreciated my parents' kind of alternative look at how to participate in society. And they actually come from very traditional backgrounds, and so they blazed a path for themselves that made sense for them. And it was sometimes very difficult, but in the world today, I think it's given me a lot of skills. So I consider all of that part of my human capital, and it probably is what led me to in my own personal family creation process. My husband and I met in law school, but my husband's from India. He's not American born, Indian origin. He's Indian born, Indian origin. And then we got married and moved and lived in the Middle East and Dubai for a really long time, where we had our 2 kids. And so I'm also blessed, I guess you could say, with a new wider family, which includes a whole bunch of people in India and other parts of the world, because my husband's family, his sister lives in Australia. And so we have this, my nephew is Indian origin from both parents, but also has this full-on Australian accent. So we have a lot of fun in our family with the diversity and different experience that we have, just from living in lots of different parts of the world. And I consider all of that really important part of my human capital in my life. And it also, of course, with our children, it gives us a lot of motivation to support them in a life that's going to make sense for them and bring them happiness, which is exactly, I think, what this is here talking about, which is when you talk about wealth planning and estate planning, happiness needs to be part of that, which I like that a lot about this particular category, the human capital category.
Yeah, and you really moved to the United States and back here to Austin, where you have some family connections to Texas, really sort of at the behest of your children. They basically said, Mom, we want to grow up in our teenage years in the United States.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. And our situation is a little complicated because we kind of are stretched across, 2 different parts of the world at the moment. But yes, my daughter was like, this is where I need to be. And it made a lot of sense because they've had great exposure to other parts of the world so far. And now they're getting to know their Texas roots since I'm from Dallas. But the funny thing is that my daughter just graduated from the 8th grade today. And now she's off to Massachusetts to go to boarding school. So she's got her Texas experience under her belt, and now she's going to go experience the Northeast.
Remember, Sarah, it's prep school, not boarding school.
Oh, yeah, it's prep school. No, she's not being sent away. She's going to prep.
So you have enabled her, and I know that she's really driven that process, but to take steps to achieve her happiness. She's very directed, impressive young woman. And she just really takes after both her mom and her dad. But, I think that it's wonderful. I think you're really wealthy, Sarah, from a human capital perspective, everything that you said, but, you've really, as a parent, fellow parent, and as I can admire moms, you've invested tremendous amounts in your children for their well-being, and no parent is perfect. We've all made our mistakes as parents, but I really can see how both you and Hari have made sacrifices to put the well-being of your children first. And I think your children will grow up, and I know that they appreciate it now, but for sure, as they get older and older, they'll appreciate the wise decisions that you and Hari made at this critical time in their life. They'll appreciate that more and more, and it'll really inspire them with these thoughts about passing along a heritage. I can see that, Sarah.
No, thank you. That's a really good way of putting it, because the world we live in grows ever more complex. There's a lot of everyone in it, and to be able to navigate all of that is another kind of human capital probably that you have. And maybe we'll get into that. Some of it's social capital and intellectual capital, but that gives me a lot of energy and motivation too, because, you know, when you raise little humans, you're making a contribution to the future. And I think most parents, no matter what their circumstances, care for their children's future. You know,
Oh, for
that's one
sure.
thing we
That's
all on the planet have
universal.
in common. Yeah, we have that as in common, and that's probably also related to this whole idea of analyzing your own views on these different kinds of capital. If you're, you know, if you're estate planning, you are thinking about generational wealth planning, and that means you either have children or you have other small little humans in your life that you care about their futures, because otherwise you wouldn't really be probably too concerned about these things. You'd leave all your money to a social organization that you cared about, right? If you're the last of the line. So I do think that, and you know, I like to emphasize that here, Roland, and that is that in my experience, and I have considerable experience with living and working with people from literally every part of the world, we all really do have these same common driving factors, regardless of external differences of culture, religion, appearance, anything like that. And that is we care about, you know, we care about our families almost invariably.
And that's the whole point of this, is to have ultimately, you know, the financial capital be a servant, you know, to the family and progress, you know, the growth and development of the family. And so thinking about all our family members and how they provide us with the meaning and the reason to, you know, I think about it, you know, that's really, I mean, there are other reasons why I get up in the morning, but for sure, you know, every day I think about how I can be a good example to my kids, and you know, that involves working hard and applying myself and pursuing my own happiness to be an example for them on how they can also pursue that happiness.
Well, that's important, isn't it? Because there's a certain luxury in being able to talk about pursuing your happiness. And you know, when we talk about this, there's a reality, which is financial independence and financial security and financial capital are a part of happiness. They give you the ability to not only worry about survival, but proceed into caring about things that also make you just happy and all the other things. But I do think that there's a really important factor to consider, and that's what I really love about what Mr. Hughes did here with breaking these things down, which is when you have a balance between these different elements, even of your life as you're building your financial capital, probably you're going to have like a lot more energy to go forward with the financial capital building aspect. And historically, we have a lot of, you know, cultural, maybe even urban myths sometimes about this super successful, uber wealthy people in our history, like the Rockefellers and, you know, whoever else. Now we've got, you know, a bunch of people from Silicon Valley who are kind of taking those roles. And, you know, there's always a very one-dimensional side of all of that, that person was so driven and did all of this on their own themselves. And that may have been true then. I wasn't the fly on the wall in the Rockefeller family. But I do think that, in fact, the generation of significant financial capital doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens with all the human capital that's around you, or there's a consequence on that human capital. So when you can align your human capital while you're alive with what you're doing with your wealth building, then you have probably some components of a win-win in terms of your successes in all the areas of capital.
Well, no, I agree 100%, Sarah.
You want to talk about intellectual capital?
Yeah, I'll read through the paragraph. Everybody else will probably have it up on the screen, but if sometimes it's useful to read. The intellectual capital of a family is composed of the knowledge gained through the life experiences of each family member, or what each family member knows. Some signs of intellectual capital include family members' academic successes, career growth, artistic achievements, their understanding of their individual and family finances, and their ability to teach and learn from each other about what they know.
I think that's really cool. And the reason is that, again, even if, you know, my kids are still young, they don't have careers yet, although I do work on teaching them about, you know, how to manage a business, how to manage their own finances. And, we talked about that before. I have a family management company, and they're at work for my businesses. But just I can say from my wider sibling group, because we're five, an interesting thing is I'm a lawyer. My sister is a doctor. One of my brothers is an engineer. Another brother is a paramedic and fireman. And then the third brother is a DJ, artist, and sound engineer. And he does some other stuff. So, we're widely diverse in what we do. And it's really nice, actually. It's really nice to have that. My sister-in-law is a green architect. She's really specialized, and she's certifies buildings for green and LEED certifications. So she's really specialized kind of architect. So when you have that in your in your corner in terms of the diversity in your family and the intellectual capital, you get to sound smart a lot just when you talk to other people, because you've already had conversations about all these diverse topics just when you're together with your family. So
yeah, it's maybe an occupational hazard or a little bit of a bias that we wind up, we're highly educated. To be an attorney, you have to go to law school, and some of us even have 2 law degrees, but going to law school takes another 3 years after your undergraduate degree. And so we tend to really focus on academic success, and that's a thing for sure, but just appreciating that there can be other types of intellectual capacities and giftedness, not only just with respect to the academic, but we all know the stories about people being successful in business just because they've applied some practical knowledge that they have without reference to any kind of academic context, and gone on to become fantastically wealthy, successful, however you want to define success and wealth. But I think it's just emphasizing always that we have capacities that we can develop. We have intellectual capacities that we can develop, and I can say that the money that I invested in my education was the best investment that I ever made. And that's, not an unusual thing. Most people can really relate to that. So that's one place that I would go to think about, but just appreciating maybe that, some of my kids look like they're all college bound, but if one of them came to me and said, well, Dad, I want to go into a trade, I want to be a plumber or an electrician. Well, be the very best electrician or plumber, the most knowledgeable electrician or plumber that you can be. And there's a way to apply intellect and develop intellect in that way as well. So I wouldn't say that college is the end all be all. It for sure represents a great objective, a great goal for everybody, but really appreciating that everybody has different gifts too, and accepting that, not having any part of my identity wrapped up in what my children might wind up doing.
But I think that's the challenge of today's time, and it's actually a big debate, isn't it? What is the value of a university degree? And is it only of value because you then go on to do a master's degree or PhDs or whatever it is you do after law school or medical school? But I do think what underlies all of that, and I know in my own case and in my own family, there are a lot of very highly educated people in my wider family and in my family. And so it was kind of natural for us to end up with education. But I wouldn't say that we sought education for status purposes. It is because of underneath it is this curiosity and a growth mindset. And if college or university or trade school or professional training in one way or another is not the right path for a person, it doesn't change that you can have curiosity and an underlying growth mindset. And I think that's ultimately what your intellectual capital is are you interested in the world around you, and do you want to grow from it? Do you want to grow and meet the challenges of the day? And, a tool in your toolkit can be a university degree, one level to whatever level you want to go to. It can be multiple. And there are other ways to do that too. And, I have to actually joke with my kids. I'm like, it's great. My kids are pretty strong academically, actually. And so I actually make sure that they have plenty of artistic pursuits in their lives too, because I think that's really healthy. But I also tease them. I'm like, once you're, on your way to university, I want you to learn, I want you to work as a plumber or something. I want you to learn something really practical as you're doing your academic stuff, because that's something that it's okay if you have to work extra hard when you're young. You have the energy for it, and and you don't have kids yet, so it's great to learn how to put a foot in all these different worlds, let's say. To me, that's true intellectual capital, is to have the agility to go be comfortable, doing construction work at the same time that you are working on your PhD in physics or whatever it is that, in my kid's case, I think, well, there are lots of things that could be outcomes here. They're still really young. I think your kids, a couple of them are already concluded or almost concluding their university studies. And then of course you've got your daughter who's we're gonna see her in the Olympics one day for soccer. So so I do think that it's important. It's easy for people to think that intellectual capital means education, but underneath that, I really think it means curiosity and a growth mindset and doing something to further your intellectual abilities in one way or another, whatever that is.
Yeah, I really like that, Sarah. That's going to be my takeaway, the word curiosity. Whenever I look at intellectual capital now, I'm going to say curiosity. I get that from Sarah.
Good. I want to be credited. No, I'm kidding. Well, what do you think about social capital? Because this is such an important area. Social capital in this context refers to family members' relationships with each other and with their communities. And no family exists without some social capital. And some key indicators of it include a family's ability to make thoughtful, shared decisions together, to welcome new members into itself, and to give itself in time, talent, and treasure to the larger society of which it's a part. Well, go ahead. What do you think about this one, Roland?
Yeah, I mean, my mind immediately goes to spiritual capital, because most of my social capital right now is wrapped up in my main social outlet, honestly, is my church. A couple of years ago, I started attending a church here in Austin and got involved there and got to be friends with people there and volunteered there. So that, I think, is a representation of a social group for me, and where I get a lot of meaning and value. And then the other members of my family, for sure, and just understanding that they have their own relationships, and encouraging that, and not demanding of their time, maybe when they want to go, not insisting that my children attend the same church as me, appreciating that they have their own peer group and they're going to develop their own social relationships. And so that's kind of what I think about with social capital. What about you?
Well, I think, I have two different views on this one. First of all, I think it is social capital, and being a member of your community is something that is really important everywhere in the world. In the United States, it's often focused around church or a religious institution. In other places, less so. It might be different kinds of communities that you're involved in. Or even if you're a religious person, say, you might not actually do things with your church or your temple or your mosque. You might do things with a different kind of group organization that you have, such as your wider family. And for example, in Asia and in the Middle East, a lot of your social capital is connected through your wider family. And by that, I mean through multiple layers of uncles and aunts and cousins and second cousins and all of these things. And then all the ties you have through marriages into different big families like that. But in the end, it's all the same thing, really, which is the extent of your network, in a sense. And we tend to compartmentalize our networks a little bit. I think in the United States, we have our business network, and we have our this network, and we have our school network. And sometimes those boundaries cross each other in an organic way, and other times they don't. In other parts of the world, those boundaries are much more open. Like your business network is your family network, is your social network, is, But in the end of it, I do think it all points to the fact that we need each other. We need people to be in relationship with, to thrive in this life. And in my personal view, the way we do that is with neutrality with each other and building relationships that don't involve a lot of dictating terms to each other or negative treatment of how people present themselves or any of those things. So this kind of social capital is something that you have, I think, and that you can give to your kids, but you also need to teach them how to create it for themselves. And that's part of what carries generational wealth forward, really, you know.
Yeah, the sense of community, it seems like it's interrelated. We're going to get to spiritual capital here in a second, but the idea of a community being something greater than me, you know, and that we can all agree upon is, well, sure, our community is something we want to preserve, we want to encourage and, you know, build up. And what you said, that, you know, no man is an island, right? None of us exist alone, always in context of other people, even if we don't would prefer to maybe go out in the woods and be a hermit or something like that. But those are really your two options, you know? And so understanding how we can participate in our communities, contribute to our communities, and take full advantage of our communities as well. And, so that's good. I like that, Sarah. Again, your broader perspective is very valuable.
Well, thank you. Because I'm just thinking as you're talking, you know, in these days, talking about community, sometimes people mean very narrow things by community. This is my community at my church, and this is how we are.
Yeah.
And I'm, you know, everybody has to decide what that means for themselves. But for me, I feel really blessed that my community is extremely broad, and I was taught how to seek, I guess, fellowship with people, if you want to use some terminology that's familiar here, who are very different from me, just because by being able to recognize common human elements. And so for that reason, I view the whole world as my community, and I'm grateful for that. Other people have different views on that, you know.
Well, I mean, I think that gets us to spiritual capital, Sarah, because that's one of the many reasons why you and I are friends, is not only do we put our families first, but we do think about the world as a whole. And we really do have some traditional American values of equality and equal opportunity among all people. And so I guess that could be a component of spiritual capital, just thinking about those traditional American values. But I think that those traditional American values are rooted in something even deeper. And we all know about the background of, you know, how the United States was founded. But, you know, I think that there was this element of placing an importance on freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And that's the different religions that we each may have. I mean, I grew up in the South. What do you expect me to be? Anything other than a Christian, really? But you grew up in Texas and you came out with a different background. So we each have our own different beliefs, but I think really respecting that. And for me, I love this definition to really understand it. The family's ability to share and sustain an intention that transcends each member's individual interests. So this transcendent quality. And that's what I think we want to grasp at or want to emphasize, is that there's something greater than us and than all of us. So anyway, I'll shut up.
Well,
What do you
and
think?
you know what? I think there's a deliberate use here of the term spiritual capital. And that is because religion, your religious choices or what you do, you know, also ties into your social capital. But that's actually distinct from your spiritual capital in this framework. And I also agree with this, which is, you know, like you said, your ability to seek something broader than the individual's interests. And I do think, you know, in the South here in the United States, there's an assumption that you're going to have a close relationship with Christianity. It's a fair assumption most of the time. Doesn't mean that there are plenty of people who have different views or different religions that are really also important to them. And, I did grow up with my grandfather being a very significant member of the Presbyterian Church and the Presbyterian community in Dallas. So I have a background with that, but I also was taught by him not to be too tied into doctrine, which has given me, I would say, a lot of spiritual capital to, again, relate to what's underneath what your religion might be or your practices or whatever it is that you do, to touch base with, maybe what's bigger than yourself or myself. And I have my own practices, and other people have very defined pursuits that they do in the context of their religion. And those are all, to me, all the same kind of journey. It's just different tools that people use. So, but this may be also interesting in this section, and this might be something that's part of spirituality also, and that is also part of life, but and also financial wealth building or financial capital building. And that is, how to step forward when you need resilience. What do you rely on when you have problems? How do you overcome low moments? A spiritual life in one way or another steps in is something that a lot of people use in one way or another to persevere through, the ups and downs that any life has. So I think it's interesting that this is something that is recognized in this framework.
Well, gosh, Sarah, can I make a plug for meditation now?
I have been meditating since I was a teenager.
So what you just said is, what do you turn to and when times get tough, and we all have our challenges. Sometimes we are literally driven to our knees by life circumstances. And I think everybody can understand. I mean, I want to respect the atheists as well, but maybe at some level or at some point, everybody identifies with calling upon a higher power for assistance. And I was so encouraged about 5 or 6 years ago, I learned about a meditation tradition that was connected with my faith system. And meditation is a practice. I think everybody's sort of aware of that as a thing. But for me, that consistent meditation practice has been a spiritual practice that really has yielded great benefits for me. So I can't recommend it enough. And it's something that I would say, just start 5 minutes a day. Something consistent can be really helpful, even a small amount, but the consistency is what's important. And really, I can testify how much of a difference that's made in my life. At age 54, I feel like I'm really growing as a human being, and it's large portion attributable to my meditation practice.
I think I've been meditating for a long time, and different kinds of meditations, and I have a whole bunch in my toolkit that I rely on. But I do know that when I go, I think 3 days is my max. When I go 3 days without meditating in some form or fashion, it's kind of like when you go 3 days, maybe not eating well or not sleeping, I just feel, very not balanced. And so, I can't recommend meditation enough. And everybody has a different way that they approach meditation. And it takes, by the way, just if we're going to continue this plug, it takes a while to get used to it. So, you don't start off good at meditation.
Yeah, and I mean,
that's
maybe
not the point at all.
you never really get good at it, and
Yeah.
it's just, I think a lot of it is just the mere act of engaging in that, that's one thing that I was really inspired. If I were ever talking with somebody that felt like they were poor in the other areas of their lives, they could immediately start building up some spiritual capital by taking up a meditation practice today. And so if you do feel like that, sometimes I wish I had more zeros in my bank account. But then I think, well, maybe if I did without the balance of the other types of capital in my life, I really may become like one of the people that wins the lottery, but then 3 years later they're impoverished because they don't adequately have a foundation on how to use that money in a constructive way, both for themselves and for the people around them.
Yeah, and I also think now that we're on financial capital, is which, obviously is probably the most traditional of definitions in terms of it's a property that a family owns. Just talking about property that a family owns is an interesting idea, because in our society here in the US, we're very individualistic, and that's important to do that. That's how things work a lot. But, if you're talking about all these other capitals that are actually kind of group oriented, then obviously the financial capital is also the family's money. And I think it was my husband told me once, he was reading maybe the memoir or something about one of the Walmart heirs. And she was saying that from an early age, she remembers being taught, as a family, you preserve the corpus. You preserve the corpus, which means that, there's, from her earliest memory, maybe there were awareness of things like what money even is. There is this idea of the family's money and what you do with it. And maybe that's important, and to talk about all the capitals this way is you preserve the corpus of what you have, which means recognizing what you have in these different areas, and also in the money part too. Because I do think they all feed each other. I don't think, you need to constrain any one of them to benefit any other one of them. Kind of tend to think that more of all of them is actually a positive. And that's ultimately what generational wealth is, right? Is growing in all these areas continuously, and the next generations continue that growth. So I guess, in my view, underneath everything is this growth mindset, right? So
Yeah, and I guess the recognition too, for me, that in the end, the financial capital doesn't generate any real meaning for our lives, and meaning where we derive, our purpose. It's going to come from the other areas, but I think through this, it really helped me kind of differentiate, that financial capital, and understand why, rich people can be unhappy.
see, I also think that financial capital does have meaning. I think it
Okay.
can mean a lot to a person.
Okay.
I think it's not bad to think about money and your wealth, and to feel good from the process of, generating those things.
I thought maybe
And-
like expansion of agency. It lets you, what it lets you do.
Exactly. And I think he says here, financial capital greatly contributes to families' ability to cultivate their other forms of capital.
Yeah.
So you have quality healthcare, education, philanthropy, which is, I think, mission-driven activity that a lot of us resonate with. And, coming together, building and sustaining dreams of yourselves, your family, other people, all of those things are really probably great. And if you focus on the money part of it for a while, I think that's okay too. I just think that in the end, you probably, if you're focused on just money, you probably are actually incorporating the other capitals, just with maybe not realizing it or not needing to articulate it. Because I kind of think none of these exist without the other. They're all there all the time, whether you acknowledge it or not.
Yeah.
So-
There's a lot of overlap for sure.
So, and I do think, with financial capital building, we have a lot of messages out there of good views and bad views. There's a lot of interesting history to money itself, and whether money's good or bad, and there are religious and political and socio-political elements that come into cultivating people's views towards money, and who has the money and who shouldn't have the money and who should have them. I mean, this is essentially, the story of a lot of empire building and all, so to me, it's healthy to also feel comfortable only talking about money if you want to. It is true though that, some people probably use the pursuit of money to make poor choices in the other areas that hurt people. And that may be what you mean. I think that might be what you mean, Roland, is something along the line of, that these other areas are important, and any of them really can be used, I guess, to harm someone. So that's maybe a different conversation. But
Well, I just think this conversation that we've had kind of shows how useful these ideas can be in eliciting thoughts and provoking topics of discussion for families that are thinking about these issues, or individuals even. So we hope that you've enjoyed this discussion about the 5 capitals and it being a framework for developing your own personal wealth journey. And then, in an advisory capacity, how we think about this and advising other people. And so I don't know, Sarah, what do you think? I mean, I think that, we're right
about
at
ready to wrap up, but I just have
45
one
minutes.
comment, Roland.
Yeah, go for it.
I have one other comment, and that is, how many times have we talked about the 5 capitals, you and I, Roland?
Well,
And today
why?
in our discussion, we just had new points, new points
Yeah.
of view that I didn't know and you didn't know about me. So I would encourage everyone, even if you just want to have a lively conversation with people in your community or your family, or even just with the closest people into you, business partners, whatnot, this is probably a great tool to use in any capacity, because if anything, it'll spark conversation and potentially ideas about what to do in any of these areas for the future.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I think that's about it, Sarah. What do you think?
Yep, let's wrap it up. Thanks
Okay.
everyone for joining us today here on Alt Investing Made Easy. Please like and subscribe to our channel.
And remember, everyone, take aim with your alternative investing strategies.
See you next time.